Hi, my name is Abby Eisenbrown and my presentation is on how women's fashion affected costume design in American theater through the 1900s to the 1990s. So fashion is an extremely important part of American theater. Costume designers often use fashion to influence their works for a design. And this was extremely important for a play because it appealed to the audience and it also increased the play's production because it enhanced the play. So moving on to the beginning of the 20th century, from the 19th century, sleeves lost their shoulder fullness. Also bustles, which are the big bumps on back of dresses, were fuller. Also waistline drops, which emphasized the full bossing that they wanted. Moving on, costume accessories increased in number and size. This allowed texture, detail, and realism for a play. So moving on to the 1910s, the dress lines became shorter. And this was mostly due to society allowed women to wear shorter dresses. So of course women on stage were going to want to wear shorter dresses. I mean, it was more mobility. Other things that changed were the waistline was also broader and it was also a little bit higher. Hips were straighter and hairstyles were top heavy, and they also wore hat pins. So mobility became an extremely important part of this decade. For example, narrow hobble skirts were invented. This was a slit down the side so women were able to walk better on stage. Another thing which were designed for tours was called motor clothing. It allowed for more mobility. Two other things that were made for increase in mobility was corsets. Instead of being more broader up here and narrower, it was a little bit higher so it wasn't as hard to walk in. And Harlem skirts, which just shortened length. So, the 1920s. Women started to change their view towards their figure. They believed it to be something not wholly covered or to be something partially revealed, but not to be partially covered. One such design that came out of this time period is called the flappers. And the flappers were people who didn't care about how high the neckline came up, or they wanted to wear boy-cut short hair. Also, their waistlines, it was a lot wider, and their dresses also rose. Also, women, instead of wearing face powder, they wanted to wear mascara and lipstick. This can all be seen in plays such as The Great Gatsby in Chicago. Moving on to the Depression, or commonly known as the 1930s, during this time period, dress materials weren't as plentiful. So as a result, women had to start sewing. And sewing wasn't a really important thing because ready-made garments were made up till now. So people didn't want to buy this because of the stock market crash and there wasn't a lot of money. So women went back to sewing. But some of the things that did come out of this time period was classical shirt waistline dresses with button-down fronts and neck to line, from neck to bottom. Also skirts started to rise. During the 1940s, this was one of the considered most unfeminine and inartistic time periods. This is most likely due to the wartime. It froze everything. There was no changes in silhouette, hats were tilted forward, and one thing that did change from the last decade was the hair. The hair was actually something happened to it. It was wavy down the back and curled toward the temples. So according to Kerr, one thing that changed was silk stockings were replaced by rayons and nude and copper tints, which never became part of the ensemble in theater. All of these trends can be seen in the play A Lady's Not for Burning. This play emphasized the wartime at this period, and it also emphasized plain and inartistic dress wear. In the 1950s, a new trend rose. It was called the teenage market. Clothes reflected attitude to their environment and challenged formality and social status. One of the trends was the greasers. This can be seen in Grease or Guys and Dolls. People often wore leather jackets and tight-fitting pants. Some other trends that came out of this time period was flower-printed shirts. Tights were replaced with stockings that were over full skirts that were worn over masses of petticoats. Also, perms were extremely important in this decade. So in the 1960s, plays started to begin to resemble history-accurate plays. Also, fashion during this time period was highly vascularized. This can be seen in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. In Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, people wore bell-bottoms, at least whenever the play was done during this time. People wore bell-bottoms and dresses were often towards the neckline. So one of the fashion trends that came out of this time period was the hippies. The hippies, they promoted love, peace, and they hated war. They were against it and they protested. Often at times they wear peace symbols out of their body and they wore beads. Two other things that came out of this time period was miniskirts. Miniskirts were extremely important during this time period because before this, women weren't allowed to wear anything that's like above the knee, and if it was only slightly above it. So it was extremely important that miniskirts came out because it was the first length that was extremely short. Moving on, silhouettes were traded in favor of kitten heels and flat boots. So as a result of all these trends coming out, fashion designers were able to use all these new fashion trends in their own works, and it made plays more creative. So in the 1970s, it was about the same as the 1960s, but a little bit more flamboyant. The only things that really changed included bright colors, tight-fitting pants, and platform shoes. So in the 1980s, it was extremely important. There was a lot of things happening during this time period. It was very highly influential during plays and its designs. For example, some things that came out during this time period was volumized hair, acid wash jeans, flash dance style, miniskirts and leggings, neon colors, lingerie styles, and jewelry was a huge part of this. Another trend that came out of this time period was the preppy style. Everyone still uses the preppy style. It usually symbolizes a rich person. And whenever you think of a rich person, at least the preppy style, it's people who wear the sweater with its tie in the front or the polo shirts with khakis. So these trends highly influenced plays like Cats and Me and My Girls. And this can be seen in Cats because its costume design was over the top, and this is most likely due to styles at this time period. Like the hair that the Cats would wear, it was huge, and we can see that volumized hair probably had an effect on this. So, the 1990s. So, over-the-top styles from the 80s transferred over and became more quiet styles of the 90s. The 90s embraced a more minimalized look, and they wore more casual wear. Like, jewelry wasn't very important, and people didn't wear mini skirts. They wore more of jeans and just jackets. But some things that did come out of this time period was they wore baby doll tops, stirrup pants with flat pointed boots, and more. Another trend was the grunge look. It's exactly how it sounds, it was the grunge look. So through all these time periods, fashion was a huge influential part of theater because costume designers used fashion